All right, y'all, for today's mini Devo, we're going back to Genesis 6, verse 3. We're going to move on now. And yeah, we're talking about all things back to the days of Noah. So on verse 3, Moshe, who's writing this part of chapter 6, he lets us know what God is thinking, what God is saying. He says that God will not strive with man, for man is flesh. And then he adds towards the end of that verse that man's days will be 120 years. So it's pretty interesting because, do you remember, let me ask you a question. Do you remember when the flood began? Do you remember when the flood began? Do we have any dates? Do we have any time reckoning, any keeping or tracking of time? Do you remember? If you go to Genesis 6 through 8, you will find when the flood began. And that'll give you a time frame, kind of like a timeline where you can figure out then when the 120 years began. So if Noah was preaching or sharing and building and doing everything he was doing in preparation for the flood for 120 years, and that took place right before the flood began, obviously, then when did those 120 years begin? That'll be today's homework. But now I want to close by saying this to you. Moses, who was writing this part of scripture, is telling us that God was so merciful, so gracious, that not only he gave Noah an opportunity, himself and his family, to get on the ark and build the ark, but also to create an opportunity for others. Whether they chose to accept that chance or not, it's out of his hands. People got to choose for themselves. But God is so gracious, he was just looking for an excuse to save people. And he gave Noah the opportunity to share that with others. In other words, he wanted everybody to accept it, and he gave 120 years. Does that not scream mercy, love, grace? Have you thought about that? How many opportunities God gives you today? We'll see you tomorrow. We'll continue to talk